I have a terrible tendency of meeting mentally unstable individuals doing weird things. Meanwhile, you call 911 when you're two 14-year-old girls walking in the evening and a woman runs out of a smoking house crying. My friend, we'll call her Rose, called 911 while I talked to this frantic woman. "He can't be in there," she cried. "He has lung cancer, but I couldn't get him out before the smoke went black." "You're going to be fine. My friend already told them the street and house number," I told her, avoiding possibly lying to her and telling her this lung cancer man will be fine. I didn't know if he would. I barely understood the situation. The fire truck showed up extremely fast, and I guided this mess of a woman away from the action. They dragged this old rat of a man from the house. It wasn't burned, but he sure was coughing up a lung. By the time the flames were out, the man was able to walk, though it felt like the fire had been going on for a while. The house was barely damaged. Apparently a heater randomly caught fire or something. The man paced around and refused to go to the hospital. So eventually the emergency services all left. The man stared at us in a creepy way, but I tried not to think much about it. He didn't say anything, he just wide-eyed stared at us, awkwardly approaching, but he never got close enough to speak to us because the woman kept holding us away from him. She very sweetly asked us our names and other irrelevant things and thanked us repeatedly. It was late, and we had to be on our way, though I only lived right down the street. Rose and I were going to casually pass by the man, as he was standing near the path we take, but the woman projectiled herself between that guy and us, still babbling nothings to us. The whole thing was weird. About 2 months later, I had moved out of that neighborhood, and the news was on. My mother mentioned to my father how familiar the house on the news was. I recognized it immediately as the house Rose and I called 911 for. I tuned into the story. That man apparently tied that woman up in the house a month before murdering her and hiding her body under the house and letting her rot for another month before someone noticed the smell. The timing added up, for this all to happen immediately after the fire. To add to this man's horrifying profile, he's a convicted rapist, sex offender, and has a history of hurting and killing animals. To think that if we hadn't been there when we were, that man may have burned and that lady would still be alive. It's even scarier to think the reason for her strange behavior in hurting us away from him. I guess I should start this story off with providing a little bit of background information about where I'm from. I live in a rural part of the United States. What roads aren't dirt are covered in cracked cement and filled with potholes. Where I live consists of nothing but a small general store. The community I live in is about 1,000 people strong. Being the small community we are, we definitely aren't a close-knit one, and we mostly keep to ourselves. I always thought that the area I lived in was safe, at least. I did until this one event occurred. It happened about 3 years ago. It started off with my friend, we'll call her Hannah, and I. We were both bored as living in the country doesn't really provide two 15-year-olds with much to do. After sitting on the couch and debating what we were going to do for a little while, we both decided on contacting her boyfriend, we'll call him Ashton, and having him meet us down at the general store to hang out for a few hours. The general store is about a 2-mile walk from my house, down country back roads. However, being the fit young girls we were, we didn't mind the walk. After walking for a little while and talking about the random things that teenage girls will talk about, we noticed a car pass by us. The car was a 2003 Golden Impala with an unusually loud engine. We thought this was odd because the road we were walking on never got much traffic. We just assumed the driver could have been lost. After walking a short distance, the car passed by us again. This time it was going slower than before. Being the naive people we once were, we thought the driver could be looking for something he'd lost. We noticed another man in the passenger seat, sticking his head out of the window. He seemed to be looking around. We thought this was weird, but we didn't let this deter us from our original purpose. We made it to the general store with no further incident. We took a seat on the bench outside of the store and waited for Ashton to arrive. Soon we see him coming over the hill he always has to go over to get to the store from his house. He waves at us and begins approaching us. We both greet him and he takes a seat next to us, and we all start talking. Eventually I am left alone on the bench because he and Hannah left to go sit and talk alone around the back of the store. Being young and bored, I turned my attention to my phone and began scrolling down my Facebook newsfeed, paying no attention to my surroundings. Soon I hear a familiar engine's roar. I glance up from the video I'm watching that one of my friends shared to see the Golden Impala parked in the parking lot of the store. This immediately sent up red flags. The driver gets out of the car and begins walking up the stairs to the store's entrance. He was a very dirty man. He had long, grey hair and looked as though he hadn't showered in weeks. He looked to be about late 40s to early 50s. He smiled at me as he walked past the bench I was sitting on. Where I'm from, this usually is a common pleasantry. But when he smiled at me, I had never felt so unhinged in my life. I was still sitting on the bench when he came out of the store. He was carrying a 24-pack of Budweiser. He walked back to the car without glancing at me. He got back into the driver's seat of the car and began talking to the passenger. This man looked a bit older than the driver of the car. He also looked twice as dirty. It was around this time that Hannah came back to the front of the store without Ashton. "Where's Ashton?" I asked her nervously. She gave me an odd look. "He had to go back home. He just left." "Why?" "I think those men are following us." As I said that, I could feel the terror rise within me. Her eyes quickly grew wide with fright as she noticed the car from earlier sitting in the parking space. "Ashton's not that far away," she said. "He's not even over the hill yet. Let's try catching up to him and telling him what's going on." In the moment, that seemed like a great idea. Of course, when you're scared, anything seems like a good idea, as long as there's a chance it'll get you out of the situation. We started walking towards Ashton at a normal pace, in hopes the man wouldn't suspect that we knew they were following us. Unfortunately, this didn't work. As soon as they saw us begin walking down the road, they threw their car into reverse, pulled out of the parking lot, drove a little bit ahead of us, and blocked the road off. At this point, we were terrified. We were frozen with fear as the man on the driver's side rolled his window down, and he began speaking to us. "Hey there, pretty ladies. You guys need a ride?" he asked in a gruff tone, his voice sounding as if he smoked 6 packs a day. We both shook our heads. "You sure?" the man on the passenger side began. "We could use 2 pretty girls like you." At this point, I was beginning to come out of it and was able to somewhat speak. "No, that's okay, we have a ride," I said as I trembled. We could see the men's demeanors change as I said this. "Get in the car," the driver said as he motioned to open his door. "No," I screamed. "Stop, I'm calling the police." I pulled my phone out of my pocket and got ready to dial. The men, seeing this, laughed at us and drove away at a fast speed. We ended up calling my mom to come pick us up instead of the police. Don't ask why we made that decision, I don't know. As my mom was on her way, we began yelling for Ashton to come back. We yelled his name for a while, but he never returned. We ended up both going inside of the store and standing there until my mom arrived. The police did end up being called, but not much was done about it. We never heard anything back from the police after we had told them our accounts of what happened. We later learned that Ashton had heard us calling his name, but didn't turn back because he thought we were playing around. So to the men who followed 2 young girls and tried getting them in their car to do God knows what to them, let's not meet. My husband and I live in an apartment complex in kind of a crappy neighborhood, low-income homes, what have you. There are always lots of break-ins, and it's right next to kind of the downtown area of my city. It was mid-April last year and I was about 7 months pregnant, and my husband and I would often go out on our balcony late at night. Really just the outdoor catwalks of the apartments, which connected the outdoor stairwells and hallways. So it was either very late or very early depending on your point of view. And it was quite dark, and my husband and I were standing outside looking at the moon over the tops of the apartments. He was smoking. I was unable to sleep due to back pain, the joys of pregnancy. We were chatting about whatever. Suddenly, in the dark before us from the first floor, we heard someone talking. It startled us both, and my husband cocked his head and made a shushing gesture as we both froze. A man's voice, low, was whispering something from the first floor directly below us. I had chills. I couldn't quite hear what he was saying, but it was only his voice, and he sounded like he was having a conversation with himself. As we stood there, both straining to hear him, his voice seemed to be moving away from us. Then we heard the distinct sound of someone shuffling up the stairs. He was climbing the steps to the second floor, slowly and deliberately, still muttering. My husband instinctively moved toward me and put out his cigarette as the man rounded the corner onto the outside landing we stood on. He was maybe 35 or 40, but he looked aged in a way I can't really describe. His hair was prematurely grey. He looked really tired at first glance because of his body language, but his eyes were frantic. My husband later told me that he seemed to be high on meth. My husband wasn't a very good kid 15 years ago and had experience with certain drugs. He was also unexpectedly walking a dog, a very pretty blue heeler. He walked right towards us, and my husband stepped in front of me protectively. The dog stopped suddenly, and so did the man. As if he had somehow just noticed us, he visibly jumped and laughed. "Hello. Oh gosh, I didn't even see you there. Pardon me, just walking my little girl." He had the very definition of crazy eyes. They jumped all over the place, and when they landed on me, they jumped immediately to my big belly in an almost angry way. Oh, pregnant. What? I said, sounding like a jerk even to myself. You're pregnant? Yeah? My wife, well, ex-wife, she used to be a doula, used to do those things, used to help out ladies and deliver them, yeah. Babies are great. I have 2 babies, well, my wife has some, well, ex-wife, I guess. Yeah. It's hard to really convey how he was talking. He sounded really excited, but also weirdly desperate. You could tell maybe he wanted someone to talk to. Now, I should mention that I'm a filthy bleeding heart, and my husband is a take-no-shit, look-out-for-number-one kind of guy. He cuts the guy off mid-ramble and says, "We were just going inside, man. You have a good night." Sure, I'm sorry. I'm Mike, by the way. I'm Mike. Mike. He sticks his hand out and I shake it. His hands are soaking wet. I almost immediately yank my hand back, and he doesn't even notice. He's taking the dog leash and twisting it weirdly. Every muscle inside of my body is screaming for me to get away from this man. Instead, I tell him my name. At this point, my husband grabs my arm and yanks me towards our apartment, past Mike and the pretty dog. I waddle to the door and, as I open it, look back. Mike is watching me very intently. Once we get inside, we lock the door and talk about him. My husband is insisting he was on meth. He also mentions that it's weird that he's walking his dog upstairs at 3 a.m. when we knew he didn't live in our building. I wrote the guy off as a creepy drug addict, brought our shotgun into the bedroom, and fell asleep. 3 nights later, we were outside again. The building across the street from us is another apartment building, and moments after we walk outside, Mike comes out, staring right at us, walking his dog. He's smiling weird. He's headed for the stairs. We wave and go inside and lock the door again. 2 days after that, I'm getting out of my car at around 4 p.m. and he appears, pretty much, at my trunk. 1 second I was grabbing my stuff to get up, and the next second he was standing there. There was no dog this time. He engages me in this weird conversation about how he knows my little girl is gonna be beautiful, just like me, and how lucky I am, how I have to never ever get divorced, because it ruins people's lives. I can tell he is extremely depressed. He says his daughters and wife left him only a few months ago. My husband yells for me from the balcony, and I make a lame excuse and leave Mike to his weird, jittery self. Husband interrogated me on what I said and warned me to just stay away from him. That night, there is a knock at my door. I check my phone and it's seriously like 3:30 a.m. I have a lot of stupid neighbors that like to get wasted, so I decide to wait and see if they knock again. They do, this time more urgently. Feeling hot, fat, pregnant, and tired. I poke my husband with my foot and tell him someone is at the door. He continues snoring loudly. I resign myself to getting out of bed. I threw on a robe and trotted out to the door. Just before I unlocked it, I froze. Something told me to check my peephole. An unexplained feeling of dread washed over me. Slowly I peeked through. At first I didn't even know what I was looking at. I squinted and tried to focus my vision. Something didn't look right. It didn't look like the hallway. I rubbed my eyes and looked again. The realization that I was staring directly into Mike's eye hit me, and I swear it felt like liquid ice in my veins. My stomach was in my feet, my breath caught, my hands immediately started pouring sweat. I jumped back from the door and started stumbling backwards. I backed into a wall and hit my head. I tried to catch my breath. Mike knocked again and called my name, softly, like he didn't want to wake anyone. Like he knew I was there. He probably did. Looking in the opposite side of a peephole will show no clear images, but it will show shadows. I turned around and ran into my bedroom, shut the door and shook my husband awake. He sat bolt upright and grabbed his shotgun, told me to stay in bed. Gladly did. I heard him tell Mike to leave or he was going to call the police, and then silence. Within a minute, my husband came back into the room and said he was gone, that if I heard anything else to wake him up. I agreed, and didn't sleep anymore that night. Several weeks passed before we heard from him. In fact, we'd all but forgotten about him until our car got broken into. The cops showed up to collect evidence and we told them about Mike, about his creepy behavior and how we suspected him of doing it. They seemed confused until we mentioned his dog. Then the officer paled. He asked for a full description of what Mike had done. He wanted a statement. Mike got picked up 2 nights after the peephole incident for aggravated sexual assault on a pregnant woman in her own home, 2 buildings down from us. He had extremely bad PTSD from his time in the Corps, and was also a meth abuser, just as the hubs had predicted. So glad I checked that stupid peephole. To give you a little bit of context, this happened a couple of months ago, right during my country's independence festivities. Since it was a long weekend and all of that, the streets remain pretty much empty. Everybody's at their houses with their family and friends, eating and chatting, or at local parties, but definitely not outside on the street because, well, you can't drink on the street, it's illegal. And a lot of police are going around checking for disturbance. Because of the festivity, my sister left to visit relatives with her boyfriend and my nephew. This meant that someone had to go check the dog for 3 days. Give it food and all that stuff. So, the way I do it, and have always done it, is I go to the house very early to let the dog out of the house and go again rather late, around 9 p.m. when it's already dark, to let her in and give her food again. A lot of cats live around, so I can't leave the dog door open, or else they come in and pee on everything. So anyway, it was around 8:30 p.m. when I decided it was around time I checked on her. The sun was still up, so I put on a coat and started walking, since it's pretty close to my house and right in the middle of the highway. I do all I had to do, pet her a little bit, and leave about an hour later. Stand at the bus stop, a couple meters away from my sis's house, and wait for any bus, since all the buses that pass through her house are good for me. Try to call Dad and tell him I was on the way back. And waiting for the bus, he told me to take the bus since it gets pretty dark, and some people really like driving drunk for whatever reason. And it had died on me again. This is when it starts going down. I leave the dog inside the house, lock the entrance, all that jazz. There are barely any cars, and this is a really busy road. I guess it just hadn't really hit me that it was that time of the year again. I'm standing there under that little roof, and the light when I see a man. The man didn't have anything in particular. He was carrying a bag, looked maybe 50, was neatly dressed and had grey hair. He was coming from the other direction. He walked a little funky, so my guess is he's a drunk, since it is a day of celebration and whatever. But when he passes right in front of me, he doesn't smell like anything. And besides, he looked really well dressed, because I mean, you don't really look tidy and smell good when you've been drinking 2 days straight, do you? This man walks right in front of my sister's and decides to cross the highway to a little shop that's there, closed at the time. From this position, he just stared. Didn't even look at the store, just stared right at me. And I'm a 5'3" girl, so I immediately went into defense mode. The sun was no more and the lights weren't good enough, but I could feel him staring. Then, after a couple of minutes, he crosses the street again to the side where I am standing, and waits in front of my sister's house, just a couple of steps away from me. No cars are to be seen, not a soul in the street, just me and him in the middle of a highway. He looks at the house for a couple of seconds. I left some lights on purpose, so thieves would maybe give it a second thought if they wanted to come in. He turns to look at me again. Then, like this behavior wasn't suspicious enough, he crosses the street again to the same store. I had managed to convince myself that maybe he was just going back home with something he had bought, but now I was convinced he didn't have any business going on but to stare. Because he wasn't really going anywhere. I am freaking out, really freaking out now. I am definitely not a coward, and this man looked small enough so I could probably knock him out with a big stone I had seen close by to the bus stop, but only if he came any closer. Then another man appears, although this one has clearly been drinking. He stands next to me at the bus stop. He is big and looks rather intimidating. I think, worst case scenario, I run the fuck out and leave these two alone. If this weird dude crossing back and forth tries something shady. Even this slightly out of his senses man seemed to feel a weird vibe. He looked at the man on the other side of the street, then at me, then at him again. Right when the weird old man is trying to come close to me again, a bus comes by. Both the drunk man and I wave our hands vigorously, trying to get it to stop. The bus is so full I doubted a needle would have had enough space. The old man puts his foot on the sidewalk where I'm standing when I get on the bus, but doesn't try to stop it. The drunk man and I look at each other shortly, like he knew and I knew something had almost happened. As the bus starts again, I look out of the window and see the old man. He still stares at me as the bus begins to move rather slowly, since it's packed with people. I thank with all my heart this one drunk man, because even though he would have probably been no help, he made me feel like at least someone would know if something happened to me. I have no idea what this man wanted, but he wanted something, all right. So yeah, let's just not meet, not ever. I found myself in a very disturbing situation. I was getting off work at my student internship in Charlotte, North Carolina, and it had been snowing all day. Now, for all you guys who live in the South, you know it's a big deal when it even calls for snow, and grocery stores are raided the nights before. I had decided to go and get some groceries to enjoy with my girlfriend, now wife, since the mayhem had ended, and only people like me who had trucks or all-terrain vehicles could get around. I went into Walmart and got the groceries I needed, and started my way back to my truck. It had now started to snow harder, and there was already about 5 to 7 inches on the ground, and it was around 12 in the afternoon. I was daydreaming about sledding and watching movies the next couple of days with my girlfriend. Just then, as I almost reached my truck, I was jolted by the act of someone grabbing my arm. As I turned around, I saw an older-looking lady who was maybe 5 foot 6 inches. She asked me if I had cigarettes. Now, I don't smoke, so I told her I did not, and turned my back to my truck. Again, she gently tugged at my arm, and then told me that she just got here from Alabama on a bus with her granddaughter and dog, and she was here for breast cancer treatment and wanted money for a hotel. Again, I told her I had no money on me, which I purposely do because I don't like donating to people's drug habits. I would rather get people food myself, if that's what they really want. At this point she said, "Do you know the area well?" Wanting to get out of this situation, I said I did not, which was a lie. Thinking she'd now leave me alone, then she asked, "Oh, okay. Well, since the weather is so bad, will you drive me to my hotel so I can meet up with my granddaughter and her dog, who are in the hotel lobby waiting? It's right up the road here. I can show you." Me being a Christian, and was always taught to help people out. So even though everything at this moment told me to deny this woman again, I told her sure, since I was raised on the rule, never judge a book by its cover. Plus, being a male at 6 foot, I figured I could take her if things got dicey. So she jumped in my truck against all odds, and the next thing I know, she's smoking a cigarette in my truck, and I told her politely to please put it out. Being nervous, I missed my first red flag when she asked me for a cigarette, since she obviously had some. She obliged, and threw the cigarette out the window to my dismay. So, we started driving up the road towards her hotel, at which I was on high alert. At the moment of going through worst-case scenarios in my head, I noticed her fumbling through her purse, searching for something, and looking out the corner of her eye at me, at which I told her, "Just so you know, I have a gun in my truck, so don't do anything crazy." Now I did have a gun, but it was a shotgun that I had neglected to get out of my back seat a couple of days earlier. And in reality, this would do me no good if she pulled a gun on me at that moment. At this, she stopped messing around in her purse and pulled out her cell phone in her pocket. She looked at me and said, "Actually, do you mind taking a detour? I need to pick up some money from some friends." Okay. At this point in time, red flags were firing off, but again, never judging a book by its cover kept running through my mind. So I told her that was fine, but we had to make it quick, because I needed to make it home. At that moment, she dialed someone on the phone and said, "Yeah, this guy is coming over to bring me to get the stuff. You are ready, right?" At that point, I asked her to talk to the person. When I answered the phone, a man who sounded like he's been chain-smoking since birth said, "Hello?" I started asking him questions like, "What's your name?" and asked him if he knew of any hotels nearby. He seemed to stumble over his words, then said he had to go. At this point, I should have gotten a clue and kicked her out of my car, especially after watching so many horror movies. This is when the person goes against their gut and pays for it. But for fear of her actually telling the truth, and me feeling like a terrible person, I decided to go on. At this point, we turned down the street, and I saw a cop car sitting there, off the side. I wanted to go drop her off with the cop, but it would be terrible if she was actually telling the truth. So I passed the cop, and at this point, with a weird, eerie smile on her face, she said, "Glad he's there. Now I feel safe." Now, as we entered the apartment complex, I saw how run down it was. It looked to be a place where heavy drug traffic was going down. Just a very unsettling place, even during the snow. As I parked outside the place she said was her friend's, she said, "Okay, I'll go get the guy and be back." At this, I was very unsettled by everything. Things just didn't seem right. She saw my facial expression of wanting to just get the heck out of Dodge, and to this, she sneered at me, saying something along the lines of me being a terrible person if I left her there, in this weather, under her condition. At this, I got mad. After all, I went out of my way to help her. As I waited, I started to think about things that could happen. What if she brought back a gun, or worse? At that moment, I saw 3 guys coming towards my truck. I realized things were not right. She had set me up to rob me or something, because these guys were big, and one of them had something behind his back which I couldn't see. At that moment, I put it in reverse and took off. Thank God for 4-wheel drive. I looked back to them chasing me, and to see that what was hidden behind the one guy's back was a crowbar. I didn't know what would have happened to me, but now, looking back, I see how dumb and blind I was. There was no hotel anywhere close to the area I was in. The nearest hotel or motel was 20 minutes away. Had I waited for the guys to get to my truck, they probably would have beaten me and robbed me. or worse. I thank God every day that I escaped and was able to get married until this event. After that, I've never been to that Walmart ever again, or the area for that matter. A couple of months later, I told a co-worker this story, and he told me that a year ago, the same lady tried the same thing to him, but he declined altogether. A smart move on his part. So, horrible lady who lied about having breast cancer to trick people into awful things. I hope you get what's coming to you, and let's never meet again. So be careful who you help out, because some people will take advantage of you, or even worse. Around 13 years of age, I became addicted to instant messaging, usually MSN or the chat rooms on WinMX. I wasn't friendless or weird, but I just preferred communicating with people online, which often led to striking up online long-distance friendships. Most of the time it was completely harmless. But looking back on some of the conversations I had with people older than me, leaves me feeling I was a bit naive. But this encounter was of a different ilk. At age 15, I had my regulars I talked to, and one of them was my real-life friend, John, who knew my family quite well. I'm female, he was male. I had dated him when I was younger, but dated in the form of no physical touching and me dumping him over MSN. The closest we ever got to intimacy was me taking a topless photo of myself for him, but never sending it because I was a, rightfully so, chicken. It was weird for a while, but we eventually became best friends. One day after I'd signed in, John began talking to me as though we had already been partway through a conversation. I asked what he was on about, which confused him, as he had supposedly just been talking to me. He copied and pasted the conversation from before I had signed in. From my account, someone had been talking to him, using my distinct tone of writing, punctuation, words, and emotes used, etc. I panicked, called John, explained that it wasn't me he had been talking to. We both didn't know what to do, so we just hoped it wouldn't happen again and ignored it. Maybe a week or two later, the same thing happened again, and again. And then it started happening with multiple people. This fake me was having conversations with the people I talked to most on my account, from my own account. And they had absolutely no idea it was not me. I'm assuming this person could read my conversations and had been mimicking me. John and I decided it would be a good idea to create a new account and re-add the people I was closest with and ditch the rest. It worked for a little while, but I think the fake me must have realized I had switched accounts, because not long after that, the same thing started happening to my new account. Again, I created new accounts, and this person somehow kept getting into them. I didn't want to tell my parents, as I thought they might take my internet access away. And at the time, the thought of that made me feel sick. So I decided on a different tactic. Instead of trying to escape the fake me by creating different accounts, I quickly added my old account once I'd made a new one. I have no idea what this was meant to achieve. I think I was more curious at this point because I didn't see any danger. Everyone I had added knew what was happening by now, and Fake Me hadn't done any damage just by talking to people. Anyhow, I ended up in conversation with Fake Me. I can't remember the details, but it was actually really amusing to start off with. I was pretty witty, and I think I was entertaining to Fake Me because we got into banter, held conversations, and whatever else. Fake Me stopped getting into my new account and instead just focused on talking to me. All this carried on for possibly close to half a year. Towards the end of it, I was 16 now. I began seeing a guy, Look, who was a few years older than me. Fake Me took an interest in this and began targeting my conversations with him instead. It got to the point where he would actually stop talking to me and be talking to Fake Me instead, despite knowing it wasn't me he was talking to. This annoyed me, so with the help of John, we decided to try and cut off my old accounts by using a different computer, as we were assuming she was getting into my accounts via keylogging or something. So John brought his laptop around. I created a new account and changed all the passwords on my old accounts. He left the laptop with me for a couple of days so I could use it. And shortly, in those few days, Fake Me managed to get into my damn account again. At this point, I realized that it was a much more serious issue. Fake Me could get onto any computer connected to our internet, and it suddenly wasn't amusing anymore. Apologizing profusely to John, luckily Fake Me didn't touch any of his stuff. I think I lost it a little bit, and abused Fake Me. And by a little bit, I mean swearing, crying, generally carrying on like an idiot. Because we all know that internet bullies react so well to that kind of behavior. After my outburst, Fake Me turned malicious. Fake Me started locking me out of my accounts this time, started harassing my friends more, pretending to be me and abusing them. Some Fake Me flirted really graphically with. I still didn't tell my parents for fear of them removing my internet access and losing my precious chat rooms. It all came to a head when Fake Me found the previously mentioned naked picture of me and sent it to all my contacts. I had completely forgotten about it and must have left a copy on my hard drive. Luckily, I didn't have many contacts due to losing most for my ever-changing accounts. But still, it was horrible and had me feeling so ashamed. I know I shouldn't have taken the photo in the first damn place, but for it to be sent around without my knowledge left me feeling absolutely sick. Lord knows where that photo has ended up on the internet. At this point, John decided to take things into his own hands and told my dad. He left the part out about the photo, but the rest was detailed. My laptop was taken away. The cable for the household computer was hidden, and I couldn't use it unless I was supervised. I don't know what he did about securing our network, but it never happened again after that. I was stupid and blamed John for telling my dad, but in reality, he did what I should have done from the start. I put my family at risk because I couldn't deal with not having my chat rooms anymore. I moved from my hometown to Rio de Janeiro to share an apartment with a parkour training friend. Last year, in July, I had an injury on my left knee while practicing. I basically did a jump I knew I couldn't do. I smashed my knee into a wall destroying my ACL, anterior cruciate ligament. So I went to surgery and the recovery lasted about 7 months, while I used crutches, slowly walked again, did physiotherapy, went slowly back into training, and so on. Now, I don't have much of a family support, so I kinda had to recover by myself. I'd say kinda, because of course some people helped me out, like my roommate, my girlfriend, and some friends. But mostly I went through it alone, how I should, since it was my fault. My roommate has a very active life and he is almost never there. And all my dad did was to take one of the crutches I had, since I could walk with just one. And he could use it in his farm for I don't know what reason. So I just have one. When you recover from this type of stuff by yourself, you can absorb certain manias and life hacks. So you can take a shower, eat properly, shave, do dishes, etc. One thing that I started doing was to take the trash out without locking the door to the apartment, because it was unnecessary physical work. I had to take a bunch of trash bags in one hand, open the door, go jumping with one leg through the corridor that led to the trash thing, come back and open the door again, then lock it. Ridiculous, I know. But I always find myself in these type of silly moments. So I just left it open when I got out and locked it when I came back. I've never met nor heard anybody on the corridors of the apartments, although some things started to change positions during that time. But nothing with much value, and not in a drastic way. Anyway, about 2 months ago, I came back with everything I had with my training. But slowly, since I was paying attention to my knee, it was awesome and I was into shape again fast, moving forward and progressing and super excited until about 2 weeks and a half ago, when I ended my training day doing some front flips at the beach. Tired and giving up, falling on my butt on the sand now, I decided to stop for the day and head back home to eat with my girl, who was also tired. She trains too and suggests I do a last front flip, just so I feel I haven't given up. She actually always motivates me, since I always put myself down. So I did it with all my power. I jumped high with a double step. I flipped fast and cronk. I ended up falling really wrong on my feet and hurting my right ankle. Okay, I vomit and it hurts bad. Everybody comes near me to ask if I'm okay, all that stuff. I was really afraid that my foot had been so broken that it got separated from my leg or something. But to my surprise, I got up, my body's still warm, I go home and I slept. I just went to the doctor the day after, since I couldn't go to work due to the pain. I discovered I ended up having a lateral malleus fracture. It is a total fracture, but the bones are still lined up, and I should not have walked, and I can't walk for several weeks so the bone does not dislocate, and they can recover. Curse you, universe! There wasn't even dust on my crutch yet, and I can't walk again. So once again, I'm taking baths while sitting down, doing push-ups and pull-ups to stay in shape and so on. But I'm really frustrated, and I couldn't think about anything else than myself being this hyper douchebag that always gets hurt. Last week, I was alone and left the trash accumulate so much in the apartment that I just couldn't postpone it anymore. So here I go again, jumping on one leg to the corridor, putting half of my weight into the walls with one hand. I got the way of it from the first time I injured myself, so it came back pretty fast. When I got back, the door was open as I'd left it and entered. Locked it, and threw the key on top of the fridge. The kitchen is the entrance to the apartment. The apartment is really small, so all the light comes from a big window in the living room. I remember noticing it was darker than before, but I didn't think too much of it. And I opened the fridge to pick up some water. When I finally go to the living room, there is a 7, maybe 8-year-old kid. I freeze due to the surreal factor. He's wearing a paper mask and he is facing me, his back against the window, which he has closed. My heart started to pound so hard I could just have swallowed the Jumanji game, and all the kids in the world were listening to it together. "You shouldn't be here yet," he said on an angry, rusty tone before I could say anything. Then he starts to move really slowly, acting as if I was like a wild animal, and all of a sudden, he runs to me and pushes me to the ground. I'm freaking yelling right now. Because what the F, and I'm trying not to fall. But my right foot hits the floor hard during that, and I fall in much pain. He got scared and angry with that, and tries to open the door and leave. When he can't open it, he starts to scream in a very high-pitched kid scream and to kick the door. Something about him was very violent. I don't know. Sometimes I feel this kind of creepy vibe from children. Like the sense that they are fragile and all, but still could do you real harm when you're vulnerable. But of course, one punch from me and he would be over. So I got over myself, got up all red, picked the key, opened the door, yelling him to get out. He runs outside into the corridors and vanishes after entering the stairs area and going downstairs. I jump to the elevator and try to follow the kid. When I get downstairs, he is there, just sitting in the chair of the security guy with all the cameras from all the floors in front of him. Like nothing had just happened. As it turns out, he is the son of the security guy and helps him with the cameras. He probably saw me entering the building after the doctor, watched me leaving the door open all the time to take the trash out, and waited for opportunities to go there all the time. I talked to his father and discovered that I am not the first one in the building having troubles with him. He has some kind of behavior problems. They don't know if it is neurological. And the parents don't have the time or the money to help him out. I've since moved to my girlfriend's place temporarily and got an x-ray for my ankle, which is showing that I didn't dislocate anything when I stepped it hard on the floor. Well, thank you, universe. This took place in November 2007, during my junior high school in my hometown. I lived in a small Midwestern city that, in all honesty, seemed completely safe. One night, my two friends and I were hanging out at my house in the living room. We stopped by my house after we had gone to a local coffee shop, but we wanted to leave again to get late-night Jimmy John's. I'll try to paint a picture of my living room to the best of my abilities. The couch was against the front windows. There were 3, and the curtains only slightly obscured two of them. Facing our inactive fireplace, there was a small nook right next to the fireplace that held a large plush green chair. The chair faced the front windows and was directly next to our entertainment center. My house had two main entrances, the front door, which no one used and was perpetually blocked, and the side door, which was attached to the kitchen. The first floor of our house was basically one long hallway, each room leading to the other through large archways and no doors. On this particular night, my friends and I decided to watch TV before heading out again. It was around midnight. I was sitting in the green chair and my friends were laying on the couch facing me. I could tell the other two were falling asleep, and I decided I'd rest my eyes as well. A few moments later, my cat burst into the room and up the stairs. I didn't think much of it as she was a skittish cat, so I shut my eyes again. The next thing I know, I hear my friend whispering my name over and over. I turned my head towards her, and she was pointing in the direction of my dining room, which was between the living room and the kitchen. From my point of view, I couldn't see the entrance to the dining room as I was tucked in the nook by the fireplace. My friend was persistent, and her voice grew louder and louder until I decided I couldn't avoid looking. I scooted up to the very edge of the seat, peered over, and holy shit, a man was standing there. He was scrawny and short and wore a ski mask. And that's it. This dude was completely and utterly naked. He just stood there, completely calm, taking turns at staring at each of us. I could also see he was carrying a bundle under his arm. We all looked at each other for a few beats. My mind was racing. What the fuck was happening? Was this a joke? Should we charge him? What if he was carrying a gun or a knife? After those brief moments were over, we all started screaming. I don't know if I've ever screamed so loud in my fucking life. I took off towards the stairs as I reached them and looked back. I saw him calmly turn and walk back towards the dining room. We reached my parents' room, flung ourselves in, and barricaded the door. My parents, who were asleep before, woke up in a panic as we all started screaming about what had just taken place. The calmest of the three of us managed to call 911, and within 20 minutes, there were squad cars outside of our house. They took our individual statements and searched the property. One cop came back inside after searching our property and the surrounding neighborhood. He told us there were distinct footprints in the frost directly in front of our living room windows. They surmised that he had been standing there for hours, trying to get our attention, and, frustrated, entered our house after those failed attempts. We stupidly left the door unlocked, because we assumed we'd be leaving soon after arriving. I honestly have no idea if they ever caught this man. When I was still living in my hometown, I would be at a random store and think that I saw him because, honestly, I remember his goddamn eyes so well. They were completely devoid of any emotion. So creepy, ski-masked, naked, peeping Tom. Let's not ever meet again. Oh, and always lock your damn doors. From 2006 to 2008, I was a student at university in England, studying paramedic science. This course was a 2-year fast track into becoming a qualified paramedic, EMT. The course involved placements at various points throughout both years. First, we spent an evening, night, in a dispatcher's. I'll never forget some of those calls. Example, a man waking up in bed next to his wife, who had died during the night. Next, we were stationed with the patient transport service, taking patients to their hospital appointments when they couldn't get there alone. Finally, after waiting a good 6 months for the opportunity, it was time to spend a prolonged placement with the 999 crews. You could choose a couple of preferred locations, and I was fortunate enough to be given the ambulance station close to my home. So I moved back to my parents' home that winter for a full term, leaving my university buddies behind. In hindsight, I wish that I hadn't, because it turned out to give me far less interesting experience. The station was in Buxton, Derbyshire. Google Map it, it's middle of nowhere territory. It's also 45 minutes from the nearest hospital, so you better not get badly hurt up there. Only, people did. One evening we were responding to a call where a guy has come off his bike on the Cat and Fiddle Run. It's named after a pub by the same name on that road, which passes over the Pennines Mountains. Bikers love to bomb it up and down, it's notorious. The guy broke a brick wall with his body. Legs were over his shoulders. We took him with the blue lights to the aforementioned hospital. I don't think he survived. This is where things got messed up. We turn out of our hospital, travel maybe half a mile, and get flagged down by a pedestrian. She shouts through the window that somebody has been beaten badly. We later find out that this was the case of somebody bumping into somebody else in a bar. Nothing more. At that exact moment, a guy in a red t-shirt stumbles out from a side street and collapses in the road. I had been in the rear passenger seat of the patient compartment. My mentor and her technician riding up front. They get out before me to help him, whilst I open the side bay. Stupidly, I climb out as my mentor helps him in. That's the point at which I notice two things. He isn't wearing a red shirt, he's topless, and saturated head to waist in his own blood. And there's a mob of people heading straight at us. Maybe 10, maybe 15, I forget. I'm still outside the ambulance and pretty much frozen in terror. I'm only 19 at this point and a pussy. This was 2007. Thankfully, my mentor hauls me inside and locks the door instantly. She then turns to me, asks if the rear door is locked. It is not. They open it from the outside. My mentor pushes them back and, I couldn't believe it, heckles them, telling them to pick on a group of people, not just one man. She then manages to lock the door. What happens next will stick with me forever. And clearly has, as I'm telling this story nearly 10 years on. They begin to try and flip the ambulance. Meanwhile, another guy starts hammering the side window, shatters it, cuts himself wide open with blood everywhere, but keeps going. They were animals. There is a window between the rear and front cabin. We see a police car approaching. He doesn't stop and continues straight past. Please give UK cops guns, I do not blame him for not stopping. Only later did I find out that the keys were still in the ignition, but nobody had attempted to enter the cabin through sheer luck. Anyway, crazy bloodthirsty hooligan mob, let's not meet again. P.S. After this I finished my course and went off and became an English teacher instead. The number of dead bodies I saw in the time was enough to haunt me for life. To all of you brave service folk, I commend you. And I was finally allowed to go to the playground down the street from my house by myself. if one of my parents was in the front lawn. We lived in a newer suburban area, which was made up of basically all young families with kids, so they figured it would be safe. And I took advantage of this every chance I got. One July afternoon, my mom was cleaning out her car, laying all the mats on the lawn and vacuuming everything out. I was bored of watching her clean, so I asked to go to the playground, and after some prodding on my part, she reluctantly agreed. So I skipped down the street, stopping to pet a neighbor's cat. Her name was Muffin. Before arriving at the park, I climbed on the jungle gym for a while, just enjoying the warm weather and humming to myself, until I heard a man clear his throat. I turned around and shielded my eyes from the sun, trying to get a good look at him. But with how bright the sun was, I could only really make out his silhouette. He was standing at least 30 feet away on a small hill, which at the time had a wide metal slide coming down from it. "Hi, little girl," he said, trying to sound friendly. "You look like Bubbles. Do you like Bubbles from the Powerpuff Girls? You look just like her." I nervously said that I did, and he continued to talk and try to coax me up the hill. "I think Bubbles is the cutest. Did your mommy help you with those pigtails? Come here and let me see them. I have some Powerpuff Girls toys in my car. You might like some of them and take them home. You should come with me and see if you want any." I continued to refuse all his offers, and I became increasingly uncomfortable. I remember mentioning that my stomach hurt and that I should go. And in retrospect, it was probably panic causing me pain. He didn't make any attempts to move down from the hill, but I noticed his hand moving up and down in his pocket, and something straining against the front of his jeans. At the time, I obviously didn't know anything about what he was doing, but I had a strong gut feeling that it was something very bad. I was very blonde at that age, though as I got older my hair turned brown. When I was 4, it was basically platinum blonde. I was also wearing a light blue summer dress and little black shoes, so I suppose I did look very similar to the cartoon character. But every time he called me Bubbles, it just made me want to vomit. "Come up here, little Bubbles. I have a trick to show you. If you sit on my lap and we go down the slide together, we can go extra fast," he told me. He was talking very quickly, almost in a panic. He kept repeating that I should come to his car and see all the toys he had. I was frozen on top of the jungle gym, and I just kept repeating no and "I don't want to." Suddenly his voice got louder and took on a tinge of annoyance. "Come on, little girl. I haven't got all day. Do you want the toys or not? There's lots of them. Probably more than all your toys at home put together. I'm parked just over there." He started to walk down the hill slowly, still touching himself through his jeans. When he got to the base of the jungle gym, he was whispering under his breath that I was such a pretty child, and that we'd have so much fun together. This is when I got a better look at him. He was probably in his late 20s or early 30s. And he actually didn't look like a stereotypical creep. He actually looked pretty respectable. He looked like most of the young fathers around the neighborhood looked. He was white, with neat dark hair and dark eyes. The worst thing about him was the wild look in his eyes as he continued to touch himself and ambled toward the jungle gym. I stood still, frozen in fear as he approached the jungle gym and stopped a little to try and look up my dress. When I backed up instinctively, he said he just wanted to see my little shoes and that he thought they were very nice. Then he reached for my ankle. My sock folded down under his grasp and I was able to slip away. I scrambled down the monkey bars to the other side and ran down the street to my house. I only looked back once, and when I did, he was standing at the entrance to the playground, his hand now entirely down his pants. I got back to my front yard, and as I tearfully explained what happened, I saw a van tear away from behind the playground and he was gone. We never heard anything about that man ever again, but I really hope he never got his hands on any other little kids. I'm in university now, but I still have nightmares about it sometimes. I remember I was too upset at the time and had this weird, sickly feeling in my stomach, so I couldn't even eat my dinner that night. After this happened, I got that same feeling in my stomach whenever the Powerpuff Girls came on TV. Even though I still loved watching it, that momentary panic hit me every time. So, creepy pedophile at the playground, I hope I never have to come in contact with you again. Back in my early 20s, I was trying to kick a major 4-year heroin addiction. Like I said, trying, on my own, which meant that I wasn't using as much, and it would be months in between. On this fateful day, someone had given me 2 OC80s. This was when the price of such goodies hadn't reached the almost $100 a piece mark. I had never seen these. They were fairly new on the streets, so after getting off work at the little coffee shop I worked at, I popped the 2 teeny tiny treats in my mouth and hopped on the train to head into Boston to go see one of my fave punk bands. Now, anyone who knows about kicking a habit, when you start to use less, your tolerance goes down. So number 1 rule there is use less than you used to. And I had no idea how strong one of these things was. And like I said, major habit. So of course I took them both. And for those who don't know, 1 OC80 is enough to let a 200-pound junkie feel good. So being a 110-pound girl that hasn't touched the stuff in a couple of months, I don't even remember the show. Never mind do I know how I got on the train and off at my stop. Anyways, by the time I got to my ratty little borough of Beantown, I was throwing up every 20 feet or so. I could barely keep my eyes open, and I didn't live in a very good part of the city. And curling up on a corner and hoping I didn't die was not an option. So I propped myself along the walls and was trying to inconspicuously hurl while trying to make the 5 blocks to my apartment. I was about halfway there when I noticed a shitty car going really slow behind me. I figured whoever was in it was looking for a hooker. The part of town I lived in, anyone could be a hooker. So I just turned and looked at him and shook my head. This was usually enough to get them to drive on. It wasn't. Guy pulls right up to me in this like 30-year-old crappy green Honda or something and says, in a very thick, what I'm guessing, please don't tear me apart from not knowing, Korean accent, "You need help. Get in, get in." The man looked to be about 30 and of Asian descent, dressed in jeans, blue tattered t-shirt, and I kid you not, a tux jacket. That has nothing to do with anything, I just thought it strange. Living in Boston, you see some strange stuff. Now, even being a junkie punk chick, I was always a polite girl who was so nice to strangers as to not hurt any feelings, and because of this, I would get myself into dangerous situations, and I knew this. So I just wiped the puke off my mouth and smiled at the guy and said, "Thanks, but my boyfriend is waiting for me just down the street." There was no boyfriend, and I actually had quite a bit of blocks to cover. But I was nice, not stupid. Well, not that stupid, considering the pill-sickened state I had put myself in. Mr. Man says, "You sick, you need a ride." Okay, guy can't take a hint. I told him again that I didn't need a ride, but thanks. I started to walk faster and cross the street. Unfortunately, it was a one-way, and he pulled up close enough to the curb that he could grab me from the driver's side. Alright, now I'm getting scared. It's almost 3 a.m. and no one is out on the side street. "No, you get in now." I was feeling really sick and embarrassed at this point. I was trying to hold off throwing up in front of this guy. And I know I'm about to hurl again and getting pissed. So I yelled, "No, I know, get in now. Look dude, I'm not gonna suck your dick, so just fucking leave." And then puked. Now I was always on the small side and hung around and lived in places where it was a good idea to have some sort of protection. Tonight I had my gravity knife tucked in my boot, so when Mr. Good Samaritan started to get out of his car as I was bent over, I pulled it and let the blade slide out as I stood up and said, "Please just leave me the fuck alone." His eyes focused on the knife and he got back in the car. Like I said before, his car was a piece of shit. So when he took off, it was really loud. I watched him turn the corner and started back on my wall crawl home. As I turned the next corner, lo and behold, there he was at the end of the street. He took off again when he saw me stop and stand there looking at him. But the whole way back home, I would either see him or hear his muffler. I still hadn't put my knife away, because I knew if he actually got a hold on me, I was in no condition to be able to get him off of me without a lucky stab. He actually drove by me as I was fighting to open the door to my crappy little duplex. My roommate and I lived on the bottom floor. Once I got in, I felt pretty safe. Enough to crawl to the couch and pass out because my roommate's big-ass skinhead boyfriend was there with her. And his pit something mix, who was a love bug, but smart enough to know when not to be. When I finally woke up the following evening, those things hit me really hard. My roommate told me she couldn't believe I had slept with all the ruckus. Apparently the dog had started barking around 4:30 a.m. and wouldn't stop. So they let him out of the room and tried to go back to sleep. But Rudy wasn't having that. They came back out to tell him to shut up, and he was running back and forth between the back corner window and the window behind the couch I was passed out on, which was the actual back side. Finally, standing on the couch over me and going batshit crazy acting like he was trying to bite through the friggin' glass. Without me waking up. My roommate later told me she had checked to make sure I hadn't OD'd and died. This was the point when my roomie's boyfriend decided to go out and check what the heck his dog was trying to kill. He grabbed the bat we kept by the door and made his way to the back where the window to the couch was. He heard a lot of noise going around the other side. Living in a crappy part of the city, there was a lot of crap around the building. And then a car starting up. A loud car. By the time he ran to the front, the car was halfway down our street. When he made his way back around to check the window, Rudy was trying to eat through. There was a bunch of crates moved from under the first window he was barking at, stacked up under the window where the couch was, and the screen had been cut where you put your fingers through to open it. I always read these threads where people say, "I'm getting goosebumps just writing this," and shaking my head, thinking they're so overdramatic. And now I feel like an a-hole because there really is no way to describe how you feel reliving this. Over the next few weeks, the boyfriend and Supermut stayed at our place because we kept hearing noises, and imagined or not, it scared the hell out of us. Quite a few times the boyfriend would run out when we would hear something, and would sometimes even catch a glimpse of the guy as he went around a corner. But he was never fast enough. Boyfriend would blame it on the guy being ninja fast, but we knew he was just too slow. Some may ask why we didn't just let Rudy out. This was a point in time in my state where they were thinking of outlawing pit bulls. They had a really bad rap. If we had let him out, Rudy would have caught him. And that would just end bad on a lot of levels. But seriously, what kind of person still tries to get into a house with a psycho pit bull and a 6'2" skinhead trying to kill you with a baseball bat? Now you might ask why we didn't call the cops. Well, like I said, I was into some bad stuff, and as a rule, punks don't like cops. However, the neighborhood I lived in, we all talked to each other. And some of them were cop callers. My next door neighbor knew what was going on and called the cops one night when she heard someone in her kitchen. She lived alone. She locked herself in her bathroom and started yelling that the cops were on their way. This guy was persistent and was trying to pop the lock from the outside until he actually heard sirens and booked it. The lady said she heard a loud car start and looked out the bathroom window that faced the street to see, you guessed it, a crappy old green car drive away. When I heard about this, I felt really bad. I mean, this lady is like 87 or so and lives alone. What would have happened if dude got in? Why, oh why didn't we let Rudy eat him? When the cops finally got there, the three of us were outside, so they started asking us if we had heard or seen anything. So we told them what had been going on, and I gave a description of who I thought was doing it, but also said I wasn't sure of the details because I hadn't been feeling well at the time. The cop that was writing it down almost threw his pad and pen down, saying that if people like us, punk rock, smartened up and called the police, then they could have caught this guy. Apparently Mr. Get In Now fit the same description as a guy that they were looking for that was wanted for quite a few sexual assaults around the train station. Now I felt really bad, but still had to give the cop lip over the people like us statement. But that's not the point. I've been clean over 15 years and don't live near town anymore. So I'm pretty sure I would handle things different now. And I know if I hadn't been messed up then, I would have. As far as I know, they never caught that guy. So, Mr. Get In Now, let's not meet. 'Cause now, I will let my dog chew your ass. I am the closing manager for a major movie theater chain. My location is in a semi-major city in the southwest region of the United States. I am a female college student and a night owl, so I always get assigned these late shifts. The part of town that my location is in isn't regarded as a very safe part of town for many reasons. It was a slow Wednesday night, and I was already well ahead of schedule with my duties for the night, and was helping my employees stock in the concession area. I had already locked the front doors. The usher was almost done with his work for the night. The box office attendant had 1 more hour, and the concession attendant was scheduled to get out with me and the other manager in about 2 hours. There are 3 levels of access in my theater. There's customer access that consists of locations that are accessible to customers and essentially everyone. There's employee access, which is protected by a key padlock. Then there's manager's access, which requires a key to access. I was going into an employee access area where all the paper products were stored. I was intending on bringing a box of napkins to stock the concession area with. So the concession area is connected to the entrance lobby area of the building. Theaters 1 to 8 are in order down an open hallway, immediately to the right of the concession area, after the ticket taker's podium. Theaters 9 to 14 are in a hallway that is perpendicular to the main hallway. It forks off just in front of the men's room in Theater 4. The employee access closet I was getting into was directly in front of Theater 9 and to the right of Theater 14. There is a bench right at this area where a customer was sitting. He seemed to be minding his own business as I arrived to the closet. The box office attendant for the night had concerns about this man because he appeared to be drunk at her counter. But while I was taking my break, the other manager on that night approved the transaction. He was supposed to be there with another friend. I don't think much about this at first because, while he seemed to be looking at me, I just figured he was bored and waiting for someone. I proceed to key in the code for the closet and enter. I noticed rather quickly that he tried to shoot the gap as the door closed. I decided to try shutting the door as hard as I could. I was uncertain that it would get to him in time, but I figured I could at least catch his fingers with the door and buy myself enough time to draw the box cutter I had on my person. Thankfully for me, the door closed in time. He pounded on the door and was shouting, "Let me in," at the top of his lungs. He also tried guessing the keypad code and keying in. All of my scheduled closing employees and the other manager were still in various areas of the building at this point. We communicate using headsets and radios. I called for 2 people to meet me at the floor closet. I was calm and collected, but pressed that it was an urgent matter. The other manager and the usher came to meet me within a minute of my call. The usher helped the man outside, and the other manager came to walk me out. The guy was refusing to leave, claiming that he had items in his theater still. As the usher tells it, there were minibar bottles of liquor everywhere around his seat. The friend he was allegedly meeting that night was also nowhere to be found. This guy should have been in Theater 9, in front of the closet I was getting into. I gathered the boxes I was supposed to bring outside from this trip and bring them to the concession area. We have large windows and glass doors throughout the lobby. I could see him outside, staring through the doors at me for several minutes. I decide to call the police. He is arrested after not leaving the spot. They charged him with public intoxication for the large amounts of alcohol he consumed in his theater. But he wasn't charged with the closet incident because we couldn't prove his intentions. We looked up his name after we had him formally banned from the premises upon his arrest. These sorts of records are all public in my state, so we could see everything he had been charged with. The results were chilling. He had been arrested for voyeurism with a victim under 18 and attempted rape about 10 years ago, and had only been out of prison for about a year, as well as a laundry list of other related crimes before that. We haven't seen him around since, thankfully. I moved from South America to the States in 2011. I grew up in a country consumed by violence, and getting mugged, kidnapped, or being victim of house invasion was not uncommon. I always had my senses sharp and was on constant vigilance to avoid becoming another statistic. When the opportunity to move abroad to do graduate school presented itself, I jumped at the chance, packed up my things, and started my new life. Being here in the States on my own for the first time, and being my own person, was rough. The cultural shock was overwhelming, and I had to slowly adapt. I'd left everything behind, my family, friends, and basically started all over again. It took a while, but slowly I adjusted and felt safe. The constant vigilance was pretty much gone, and I became pretty much trusting, though still somewhat aware of my surroundings. I'm a pretty big guy, and I have a case of resting bitch face, so I pretty much kept to myself and no one bothered me. It was 2012, and I had been here for about a year and a half. I was 25 at the time, and I got into my own comfortable routine. Go to school, work, come back home, watch TV, smoke some cigarettes, and just live my life. I used to sit in my balcony and smoke while dicking around with my phone. One night this dude passed by, I'm on the first floor, and asked if he could have a cigarette. I gave him one, and he talked to me for a while. He introduced himself as Nick, he was 18 or 19, and told me he moved here to the apartment complex with his girlfriend. Nothing seemed out of the ordinary. It soon became a routine of him stopping by, sometimes alone, sometimes with his girl, and just talk while smoking. I was living pretty comfortably, except my bed was a twin-sized, and I found a pretty decent second-use full-size on Craigslist. I picked it up and asked Nick to help me set it up in my apartment. That's when shit hit the fan. I always loved gadgets, and my apartment was full of those. TVs, Wii, tablet, laptop, iPod, stuff like that. He said it was cool I had all this stuff, and said if he could borrow my Wii. I told him I was hooked on a game and maybe some other time. I guess Nick must have thought I was rolling in dough because he soon started asking for money. The first time I loaned him $20, but then he started to ask every other week for more, and I just told him I was broke or had bills due. It made me uncomfortable. One day I was coming home from grocery shopping, and I saw a sketchy guy outside their door. I thought nothing of it and just went home. I saw the sketchy guy on and off for about a couple of weeks, and it just rubbed me the wrong way. It made me uncomfortable because he seemed really suspicious. I can't really pinpoint why, he just did. The first thing I thought was drug dealer. He just had that look. One night I was sleeping, and I was woken up by someone banging on my door. I'm a heavy sleeper, but it was so loud it woke me up. I was jolted awake and panic set in. I was disoriented and someone just kept banging on my door, not saying anything, just banging. I put on my glasses. It was around 3 a.m. and I just looked through the peephole. It was Nick. He had this weird look on his face like anger, and he just kept banging. I just stood there until he gave up and left. I then looked through the window, making sure he couldn't see me, and I saw him walking around, sort of like prowling. It made me really uncomfortable. Eventually he left. The next day he stopped by while I was in the balcony and asked for a smoke. I asked him what was his deal. Why was he banging on my door? He then looked taken aback and told me he had gotten into a fight with his girlfriend and wanted to sleep in my place. I told him to not do that again. He started getting more and more intense about money, and he was draining my cigarettes a lot faster than I cared for. Now, hey, I'm all about people having their vices and nurturing them, so long as you're not hurting anybody. But I'm not gonna support other people's vices other than my own. I dropped smoking and just sat on my balcony, dicking around on my phone. No cigarettes. When he asked for one after I had quit, I told him that indeed I had quit. He was like, "Good for you," but his face showed some anger. He left me alone after that. About a week after this, I came home from work and noticed something was weird on my patio. Additionally, I saw Nick with a shopping cart, and he had gone grocery shopping. I thought that was weird given that they rarely had money. I didn't pay much attention and just went to get into my apartment. When I tried to unlock the door, I realized the door was already unlocked. I thought it was weird. If there's one thing I'm paranoid about, is having my doors locked at all times. I went in and my heart just stopped beating for a second. My apartment had been burglarized. TVs, laptop, tablet, anything they could carry, they took. The TV stand was propped against a balcony door, and I realized that whoever had broken in did so through that door, seeing as they pretty much tore apart the big glass-paneled section. They did so that they could reach in and just unlock it from the inside. Then they unlocked the front door and walked out through there. Panic set in. I had never been burglarized or mugged or anything where I came from my little third world country, and yet here I became a victim. I felt violated. I I went to the leasing office, which was still open. I told them what had happened, and they told me to call the police. In my state of confusion, I dialed 911, and they asked me if there was someone currently still in the apartment. I told them no, I didn't think so, and they told me the police would arrive as soon as they could, but it could be a while, since it wasn't really an emergency. They told me not to touch anything. I called my boss and my best friend here. My boss came over and he brought me food, waiting for the police to arrive. My apartment was a mess. All I could think of was how embarrassing, because I hadn't cleaned in a couple of weeks. The police showed up about an hour later. They took my statement and asked me if I suspected anyone. At that moment, Nick was lounging by the pool, and I told the officers pretty much anything. Back home, I wouldn't have. The fear of retaliation would have been too big. But I was in America now, and I just sang like a bird and told them about everything and who I thought had done this. They asked for serial numbers of all the stuff they took, and thank God I had the boxes stored in the little storage unit of my apartment. I got in contact with them and gave them the information. Later that night, someone knocked on my door again around 11 p.m. I freaked the fuck out, looked through the peephole and asked who it was. Said it was a night security guy and he had a question. I opened the door just a little and asked what he wanted. He was with another girl. Apparently, someone had tried to break into that girl's apartment that day too. She noticed her patio was a mess and came to find him, and he told her someone had broken into my place. The security guy told me that there had been several cars that had been broken into the last couple of months, and that several patios had been burglarized as well. Well, shit. The next day, police got in contact with me and said they had found some of my stuff. Nick was indeed the culprit. He had pawned one of my TVs and had given my laptop to his girlfriend. He was arrested. The police managed to track all my stuff down and said I could pick them up on Monday. Nick apparently was trolling for drug money and had given my tablet to one of his dealers. I wonder if it was the same sketchy guy I had seen around. As for Nick, I guess his parents built him out. And him and his girlfriend were, of course, evicted from the apartment. I changed the locks so that you would need a key to open the doors both from inside and outside, and added bolts to both the front door and the patio doors. It was tough for me to sleep for a while, since my sense of security was taken from me. I grabbed a knife and kept it hidden yet readily available, just in case for when I slept. In 2015, I wondered what had happened to Nick. I googled his name and came to find he was in prison because he tried to mug an old lady at an ATM with a knife. I really hope I don't run into him ever again. So there you have it. I felt safe and let my guard down. Nothing seemed suspicious until it was too late. I shouldn't have let him into my apartment. I shouldn't have given him money. There's just so many I shouldn't haves that dwelling on it now makes no sense. But I learned, and I'm always alert. And that's my story. It happened during the late 1970s when laws in America were so much different than they are now. and most things in a small country town were even worse. My aunt never had very good luck. And when she did, it always just seemed to lead to worse luck later on. This is her story, and the story of the person everyone wishes she had never met. When she was in her 20s, she worked as a bartender and only seemed to work the night shift. People liked her, and she was friendly. But this was long before the days where a person could stop serving you alcohol if you were way beyond the limit, which is the first part of the spiral. One night she was working late, and the guy had so much to drink that my aunt told her boss she was refusing him service because he was so very clearly not all right. The boss told her she had to serve him, so she quit, grabbed her stuff, changed her clothes, and left the bar. Unbeknownst to anyone, the drunk guy got it into his head that my aunt was his ex and wanted to make her pay for leaving him. So when she left to talk to her boss, he went to his truck, started it up, and waited for her to leave the bar. When he saw her exit, he floored it and collided with her so hard and fast that a police officer that happened to be driving by right then, but had passed them, thought the guy had swerved to hit a phone pole from the awful sound it made. The guy lived, and my aunt was pronounced dead at the scene, body so mangled that her brain was actually showing through her skull. When questioned about it later, the guy said he saw several of my aunt all crossing the street at once, and just aimed for the middle one. On the way to the morgue, she came to and freaked everyone out. 1970s American medicine was not what it is today, which is the only way I could see why they thought she was dead for so long. She kept the toe tag on her keychain as a good luck charm. She was rushed into surgery and was in a complete body cast for a very long time. There was a lawsuit involving both the bar for serving the guy so long and the guy who had hit her. She ended up winning and getting ownership of the bar, but selling it immediately. This was all done on her behalf while she was in hospital, or I think it might have gone differently. After the incident, she was deaf in one ear and had to wear a hearing aid in another, which hurt her self-esteem. She also developed some form of kleptomania. She never stole anything of value, mostly just jeans and umbrellas. My family didn't question any of it, and she never went to see anyone about it because that sort of thing was pretty stigmatized back then. She just lived with this relative or that. He would apologize for her and give things back. She would apologize over and over about it, saying she didn't know why she did those things and that she really couldn't help it. My family has never been a nice group of people, so when the opportunity came to shove her off on someone as a wife, they went whole hog. They decided that since she had so many problems now that they should put an ad out in the paper under the dating section and let it slip that she was far from poor. Yeah, real classy people. As you can imagine, someone came out of the woodwork immediately and swept her off her feet. Dan. Nothing ever seemed to bother this guy. All smiles and cheer. Proposed very quickly too. Everyone in retrospect says the guy gave off sleazy used car salesman vibes. But they just didn't want to deal with my aunt anymore, so they pushed her hard to marry Dan. And she accepted. My guess is she felt like a huge burden, and having someone who seemed to like her was a huge confidence booster. Immediately after, my aunt and Dan disappeared off the map. No one saw or heard from either of them for weeks, then months. At first, they were happy to not have the burden, but now concern was growing since everyone realized that literally no one had seen her in over a year at this point. Not even once. Suddenly, even my family started to feel guilty and kept trying to reach out to her when they heard that Dan had been seen around town. They wanted to talk to my aunt, but Dan was always there with excuses, or no one would answer at all when they called and went to the door. We lived in a pretty small area, and word got around fast when Dan started being seen on dates with this other woman, Betty. This was made weirder by the fact that still no one could get in contact with my aunt. They tried the police. No luck there, as not seeing someone for a long time was not considered illegal, and you couldn't file a report on that when the husband says everything was fine, because tiny country town in the 70s, I guess. So one day, everyone is surprised when a letter comes in the mail from my aunt, begging for help, saying Dan is milking her for all her money and will not let her leave the house, and took the phone away. No one knows how she got the letter out, but they rushed right over. When they got there, the cops were there already, taking her body away. They said it was suicide, note and everything. My family did not buy it. They demanded to have an investigation, a coroner's report, everything. Since she was dead, Dan got the rest of the money, no questions asked. Moved Betty in the same day they took my aunt away. Everything about this was shady. My family pulled all their limited resources together for a lawyer. They needed to get my aunt some sort of justice because they knew this was all their fault, and they felt guilty. Before they were able to get anything, she was cremated at Dan's request. Turns out some palms got greased, and all the paperwork for this to be an investigation got misplaced. The most damning part of the whole thing was that until the day she died, my aunt had a terrible phobia of fire. There was no way she would have wanted to be cremated. After that, Dan and Betty and all the money disappeared. A few years later, in the early 1980s, Betty moved back to town, told everyone she could how crazy and scary Dan was, and that he would never let her leave. Apparently, she finally passed a note to a guy at a truck stop one day, and when the cops showed up, Dan drove off without her. This all happened almost a decade before I was born. Everything I have is just lots of people in my family telling me the same story. Nothing concrete. After that, they were more open about seeking mental health and caring about one another. But they are still awful people, for lots of other reasons. Up until I was in kindergarten, my mother used to put me in daycares or at neighbors' houses so that she and Dad could go to work. One summer, my mother asked this lady in our development to babysit for me for the summer while she went to work. I don't know what possessed my mother to choose this lady. Maybe it was desperation. Maybe it was pure stupidity. Maybe it was a combination of both. But either way, my mother entrusted this lady with me for most of the day. This lady had no business being around children, let alone be responsible for them. I honestly believe that this lady was an alcoholic, mainly because she always looked sick and tired. Her eyes were always red and her breath smelled like puke every time she talked. The worst thing, however, was that she was almost never around, basically leaving me unsupervised for several hours. The lady would only be there whenever my mom would drop me off or pick me up. Otherwise, the lady was locked up in her bedroom. Once she had me clean her bedroom as punishment for breaking a few of her picture frames. I didn't break them. I walked in her bedroom only to find several glass bottles strewn all over the floor. The lady had two nieces who were staying with her for the summer. I don't remember their names, nor if they were sisters or cousins, but I do remember their ages. The younger niece was around 8 years old. The older niece was around 11 years old. The nieces were the most horrible children that I had ever had the misfortune of meeting. The younger niece was a disgusting and rude brat. The older niece was a manipulative liar and a complete sadist. When I first met them, I was friendly with them. At first, they were friendly back, but things soon began to change. The older niece began bullying me first. The younger soon joined in. First it was name-calling, then it was teasing, then it was stealing, then blaming things on me. In just a week, things had escalated to the point where both nieces began to physically abuse me. The younger niece liked to dump dirt and food on my head and pull my hair. She, along with the older niece, once set my hair on fire. She also liked to steal my lunches, spit on food, pee on the floors, break stuff, and blame it on me. The older niece liked to throw glass bottles at me. She once put broken glass in my cereal and almost tricked me into eating it. When I asked her why she did that, she said that she wanted to see what would happen if I ate it. The older niece also liked to push me into walls and furniture and drag me by the hair, just so that she could beat me up. I couldn't fight her off because she was much bigger than me. Plus, the younger niece would join in and beat me up as well. Every day I came back home with bruises, cuts, and stuff in my hair. My nights were spent trying to pick the glass out of my skin, bandaging my cuts, and washing out whatever stuff was thrown on my head that day. My parents never once noticed. Not even when the bruises and cuts were on my face and arms. I also began to experience panic attacks at this point. Every morning I would wake up and cry hysterically, knowing that I would have to go to that house and be stuck with the nieces all day long. It was only then that my mother finally noticed something was off. One morning my mother asked me why I hated going to that house. I told her about how the girls were beating me up and throwing stuff in my hair. I showed her my cuts and bruises, as well as burn marks from when they set my ponytail on fire. My mother took off work that day and drove to the house to confront the lady and her nieces. She showed the lady my bruises and cuts and demanded an explanation. The lady called her nieces over and had them tell my mother their side of the story. The nieces claimed that I was hurting myself and breaking things to get them in trouble. That they didn't know why I hated them so much, and that they still wanted to be my friends. Believe it or not, my mother believed them and got angry at me for lying. so she made me apologize to the nieces and the lady for my behavior. She then took me home and spanked me. From that day forward, my mother ignored whatever state I was in whenever she picked me up, no matter how bruised or cut up I was, all because she assumed that I was doing it for attention. So I continued to endure the endless abuse, and the nieces continued to get away with it. I wanted to get away. I wanted to leave in any way that I could. I wanted my mother to believe me. But I knew I couldn't make her. The only thing that I could do was nothing. So I began to zone out and basically became numb. Eventually I got so numb that I practically felt nothing. By late summer, I had been subjected to 3 months of this. This was also around the time when the lady set up a swimming pool. One day, the lady decided to allow all 3 of us to use her swimming pool, probably so that we wouldn't bother her anymore. She asked my mother one morning if I would like to bring a bathing suit so that I could swim in the pool. My mother told the lady that I didn't know how to swim yet, so she wasn't sure if I should go. The lady assured my mother that she would supervise me and make sure that I stayed in the shallow end. So the next day, Mom had me pack my bathing suit and brought me to the house. For once in a long time, I felt optimistic and happy. The thought of swimming in a pool excited me a bit, so I looked forward to it, even with the nieces involved. When I got there, the lady told me to change into my bathing suit and meet her and the nieces by the pool. When I got there, the lady said I had to listen to some rules before I went in. The lady told me to stay at the shallow end of the pool. She also told the girls that because I did not know how to swim, I wasn't allowed near the deep end. She then went into the house to make a phone call and left, thus leaving me and the girls unattended. Once she was gone, the nieces walked to the deep end of the pool, but strangely didn't jump in. Instead, they sat on the edge of the pool. I went into the shallow end of the pool and played by myself. Surprisingly, they left me alone for about 15 minutes. I was splashing the water, blowing bubbles, just having a great time. For the first time in weeks, I smiled and laughed. I was having so much fun that I forgot the nieces were still around. That is until I heard them call out my name. The nieces decided to taunt me into going in the deep end. They kept saying that I was a big chicken for being afraid of going to the deep end of the pool, and that I was a big baby if I didn't go to their side of the pool. I decided to ignore them and continued playing. After about a few minutes of their teasing, I had had enough and left the pool. I guess this didn't sit well with either of the girls because as soon as I got out of the pool, the younger niece ran inside and locked me out. I ran to the glass door and pulled on it to get open, while the younger niece stuck her tongue out at me from behind the glass. It was then when I felt 2 arms wrap around my head and shoulders. The older niece had come from behind and grabbed me. She started dragging me by the hair away from the door towards the pool. The next thing I knew, I was tossed into the water. I panicked as soon as I realized that I was in the deep end of the pool. I tried desperately to stay above the water, but couldn't. The few times I did, I heard the girls laughing at me. The older niece jumped in the pool and nearly landed on top of me. I felt her hands grab onto my head and pull it down. At one point, she was dragging me across the pool. I know this because my knees had scraped against the bottom of the pool. I was flailing about, desperately trying to fight her off and get above water. It wasn't until I felt my hand hit something that the other girl finally let go of me. By that point, we were both in the shallow end of the pool. So I managed to get my footing and get my head above water. I surfaced to hear the sounds of the lady yelling at the older niece, howling in pain. The lady charged into the water and yanked me out of the pool. She pushed me into a chair and stared me down with her bloodshot eyes. "What the hell is wrong with you? I thought I told your stupid ass not to go into that side of the pool. Now look what you've done," she yelled. The lady then pointed at the older niece who had blood running down her nose and was still crying. Through coughs and tears, I tried to tell her that the older niece had thrown me into the pool, but the lady wasn't having any of it. She demanded that I apologize for hitting her niece in the face. I refused to do so and screamed, "No, I hate her." The lady soon got in my face and started yelling at me. She told me about how I was a stupid girl for not listening to her rules, that I had been nothing but trouble for both her and her nieces, that my mother left me with her because she hated me. I yelled back at her and told her that I wasn't stupid, and that her nieces were mean, that I hate them so much that I wished they would die. The lady flew into a rage and slapped me across the face for saying that. I was too shocked to even cry at this point. The lady then took the opportunity to tell me how wrong I was about her nieces. What a horrible child I am. How dare I tattle on her nieces for my mistakes to get them in trouble? How dare I not listen to her directions about the pool? How dare I attack her niece when she was trying to save me? How could I be so ungrateful to her nieces when I owe my life to them? How could I claim that her nieces were bad children when they were really such sweet and innocent girls? That I would never be as good as her nieces, and that because of my behavior, I would never be welcome at her house ever again. The lady then stormed into the house and called my mother to come pick me up. When my mother got there, she was absolutely pissed. She immediately yelled at me for making her get in trouble with her boss for taking the day off to come get me. She profusely apologized to the lady and her nieces and took me home. As soon as she got home, my mother spanked me and told my dad what had happened. My father came home fuming and lectured me about listening to people as well as not being a brat. I was grounded for a month. I haven't been to that house since that incident, nor heard from that lady or her nieces. I drive past that house on my way to work, and I get sick to my stomach every time I see it. I have never told my parents about what truly happened that day. I fear that they'll simply dismiss it as the girls just being kids and me being a brat. I've had years to think about it and come up with an answer as to why this happened. And every time I think about it, this creeping feeling always pops up in my mind. The feeling that this was more than just an unintended accident by the girls. I can't help but feel that the older niece's plan of throwing me in the pool was on a far more sinister level than regular bullying. I honestly think that the older niece was trying to kill me, that the younger niece was acting as lure for me and a lookout for her, and that when the plan went wrong, the younger niece fetched the lady just so she could get me in trouble for going in the deep end and hitting the older niece. But I'll probably never know if that was the case. Though it makes me shudder to think but what kind of adults these two girls have probably grown up to be. I'm not a hateful person, but I sincerely hope that lady's liver has failed and that her nieces have turned on her, and that both of the nieces are rotting away in a prison cell or locked up in a mental institution. Either way, alcoholic asshat and her psychotic nieces, let's not meet again. To start off, let me tell you that I'm a 20-year-old woman who looks about 15 or 16 without makeup on, and I'm fairly small in frame and height. This happened 2 months ago. It was just after Christmas, and since I'm a pretty crafty person, as a present, I got a gift card for our local arts and crafts store. My parents were going out of town to my grandparents for the day, and I decided to stay home and maybe later go shopping for new DIY projects. I remember my dad getting very serious before leaving and saying, "I really don't want you going out alone. Please be careful if you do though. Call us and text us with where you're going." It's normal for my dad to be protective, but I can't remember the last time I saw this serious look in him. Still, I let it go, thinking he's just trying to look after his daughter. I had planned on asking my boyfriend to go with me to the craft store, as it's not in that great of a location. But he was stuck at work, and I had gone to college in the area, so I was fairly familiar with it and wasn't too worried about safety. I didn't get ready or do my hair or makeup, but just got in my car. Since it was the one destination in mind, I didn't care about looking nice, and I only wanted to get more supplies to make new projects. I arrived at the store and suddenly got an uneasy feeling. I rushed to the restroom thinking I was about to be sick and vomit, but I didn't. I had no idea why this was happening, but I was just very uneasy and panicky. Again, I let it go, passing it off as my social anxiety getting the better of me. I meandered about, up and down each aisle, trying to decide what to buy when I ended up on the back wall, checking out the clearance section. Then I start hearing a noise that almost sounded like a bird, cooing. Minding my own business, I continued to look at reduced price items, thinking maybe some kids were playing or goofing off. The noise continued for probably 15 more seconds until I finally got too annoyed with it and was about to scold some twerps. But when I turned, I realized it was a man whistling at me. He was standing at the end of one of the aisles, staring directly at me, whistling and grinning the biggest, grossest grin. To make it worse, he was holding onto a basket with an infant in the seat, and his wife was farther down the aisle. This man had the audacity to catcall, hit on me, right in front of his child and wife? I was completely disgusted and immediately scoffed and rolled my eyes, while simultaneously looking to the other side of the store. At this point, I'm in high alert. I'm always pretty aware of my surroundings, but I was watching my back with every turn. I also always carry a stun gun, and had that off safety in my back pocket for easy access. Noting that the man and his family had departed from the clearance section area where this happened, I made my way back to continue looking around, thinking this was the end of my creepy day. Wrong. I saw a man, probably in his 50s, with a 1970s style eyeglass and the obligatory pedophile mustache, and hair to match. Now, at first, I wasn't so quick to judge, and thought maybe he was alone because A, he was a crafty man, and maybe had an affinity for painting birdhouses, or B, he was picking something out for his wife or daughter. Again, I was wrong. I immediately picked up that he was following me through the aisles, as he would only turn to look at what to buy when I shot a glare his way. When I wasn't glaring at him, I saw him staring at and watching me from the corner of my vision. I continued through the aisles, testing him to make sure I wasn't just paranoid from what had previously occurred. Unfortunately, he was following me, staying no more than maybe 50 feet from me at any given time. I was ready to take this guy on. I had already scoped out where the nearest employees were if I needed help, and I was ready to use my stun gun if necessary. I put him to the final test, turning down an aisle and immediately stopping before he turned in. Instead of looking for items, I was staring exactly where our eyes would meet, if he really was following me. He turned into the aisle and our eyes locked. He instantly began to sweat and panic because he had been found out. He pretended to look elsewhere, peering around me like he was looking for someone. Except there was absolutely no one else down the entire aisle, and both of us knew that. He quickly backed out of the aisle and turned and walked out. I listened to his footsteps walk away. Step, 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 until they abruptly stopped no more than 10 feet from where I stood. He was waiting for me. I booked it the other way and exited the opposite end of the aisle. At this point, I was done and just wanted to get home. I practically ran to the register, watching behind my back and keeping an eye on the camera monitors for any sign of this guy. When I got to the register, the man with the baby and wife was a few customers behind in line. I saw him smirk at me and felt him watching me non-stop as I pretended to ignore him. I almost asked for an employee to walk me to my car for safety. Luckily, I knew this guy couldn't make a scene in front of his family, and I had lost the mustache pedophile guy, so I knew I could make it to my car if I was alert. I made it to my car and locked the doors before taking a short sigh of relief. I believe these men thought I was younger and more naive due to my appearance, and thought they could possibly take advantage of me. The worst part is, when I told my parents what happened, my mom responded with, "I didn't think you were going to the store in that location." A man was arrested there last week for taking pictures of young girls' skirts and is charged with pedophilia. Fortunately, I had pants on and was equipped with a stun gun and common sense that day. So please, if you ever have an uncomfortable feeling, trust your gut. Don't be afraid to ask for help from people around you. Most of all, creepy, disgusting men in the craft store. Let's not meet. So this is by far the creepiest thing to ever happen to me, and has probably contributed a lot as to why I'm so adamant about keeping my home private, my gates locked, and my windows drawn. This took place several years ago. I was 20, and I'd just moved into my great-grandmother's old, rickety two-bedroom house in a fairly run-down part of town. My neighborhood looked, at one time, to be a small slice of middle-class Americana, but 7 decades had done its share of damage. The small, uniformed row of homes might have been squat little trailers. My house was the squattest. Other than the street being a little run down, I never felt uncomfortable living there as a woman alone. Days were quiet, and nights were only occasionally disrupted by the faint sound of my white trash neighbor's arguments getting out of hand. My great-grandmother always valued privacy, and at all times had the place shuttered, even to the point of covering the small, diamond-shaped window on the front door. I never saw the need for it, until one night. I was on the phone with my friend Rachel after a long night at work. We were shooting the shit about our days when I decided to crack open my front door to let some air in. Then I heard it. The faint music box-like chiming that grew louder and louder, announcing its presence. "That's weird," I said as I glimpsed out my small window. "What?" Rachel asked. "An ice cream truck is coming down my street." I mumbled as I tried to position myself to get a better look. "So what?" Rachel asked casually. She was clearly preoccupied with something. "So what? It's 11:30. Who drives an ice cream truck around in the middle of the fucking night like that?" I laughed. Maybe he's drunk or something, I thought to myself as I returned to our conversation. After chatting a bit longer, we said our goodbyes, and I hung up the phone. Then suddenly, there it was again. That chiming, Captown Racy's tune. But this time it was louder than ever. I peered outside and predictably saw the familiar sight of a brightly colored ice cream truck, in addition to the unpredictable sight of the vehicle's shadowy occupant. It was too dark to tell for certain, but I sensed his eyes locked on my house and me. For almost an hour he stayed there, parked in front of my house, just staring in and playing that music. I sat there frozen and silent. I didn't try to look for fear he'd see me again. Then suddenly the engine sputtered, the music switched off, and I heard him drive away. The relief bubbled up slowly, then washed over me. When I felt safe enough and knowing there would be no sleeping alone that night, I packed a bag and headed towards Rachel's house. A month or so later, everything was back to normal. My nerves had settled, and there hadn't been any other mystery ice cream truck sightings. In fact, It had become a kind of inside joke between Rachel and I. After a night of heavy drinking, I have to leave my car. I reluctantly allowed Rachel to drive me home, and after half stepping out of the car, she teased, "Night, night, don't let the homicidal ice cream men bite." I slurred a weak response and stumbled inside, making it barely to my sofa before passing out. I awoke to a sharp sense of danger. My eyes darted to my front door, to the diamond-shaped window. There, illuminated by the porch light, was a man's face pressed against the glass. He'd been watching me sleep, and now, noticing I'd woken, his face twisted into an awful sneer. Too scared to scream or move, I struggled to remember if I'd locked the door. Before I could react, the door handle jiggled and resisted, sickly answering my question. He mouthed one word as he locked his eyes on me. Hi. The sound of my neighbors pulling into the drive must have scared them off quickly, as they never noticed anything out of the ordinary. I called Rachel, hysterical, and she came and picked me up within minutes. I've since moved to a new area, and will never know if the man in my window and the creepy ice cream truck driver were one and the same. My gut tells me the incidents were connected. So a friendly reminder. Remember to shut your blinds, lock your doors, and cover any small eye-level windows near you. And creepy, night-crawling ice cream man. Let's not meet. I live in a very small town of about 100 people in rural New South Wales, Australia. This happened when my friends and I were 14. My town used to be a very close-knit farming community, but the shift to modern times and the massive drought of the 2000s led to most of the businesses to be closed and farmers to move away. The aging population slowly died and their houses were filled with despicable types. Drug dealers and addicts, thieves and dole-bludgers. Bit sad, really, but even now there are still great people here. What I've always found creepy is, even though a very small population, and I've known just about everybody since before I can remember, there have always been people in the surrounding area that no one seems to know. Old loners, mostly, who keep to themselves and no one ever sees them. On top of that, there have been several pedophile charges laid against some of them, and there have been numerous break-ins and attempted break-ins on our homes. Not to mention that for long stretches of time, we've been without a police officer, which means a 000 call would take an hour for help to arrive. It gets even creepier the further out bush you go. I've heard of abandoned farmsteads where families have just disappeared, with all their belongings, including cars, left behind. There was even a multi-generational inbred family, reminiscent of The Hills Have Eyes, discovered a few years ago. Though that's a few hundred miles from me. Anyway, I grew up and went to primary school here, but we had to travel an hour to go to high school. It took quite a while for my closest childhood friend Tim and I to make new friends. After 2 years of high school, we invited 3 friends to come to our town to go camping. Tim's parents owned a small property where they kept sheepdogs and horses a few miles from the town. We camped for 5 days there in the school holidays. The first night, as what often happens, we sat around the campfire telling stories. I told the story of some of those creepy loners I mentioned earlier, a pair of brothers that lived a few miles up the road from where we were camping. They were very rarely seen, with a reputation of being creepy hillbilly hicks. I told them the story of how one night they had tried to cripple my father over him supposedly stealing their business. They ambushed him at a local weighbridge at night. My father managed to fight both of them off. My cousin had also run into them by taking a shortcut across their field, only to hear gunfire in his direction. My cousin had lied to me before, so I didn't think it was true, but I made out like it was and later embellished their reputation with the normal inbred cannibal type crap city folk expect. On the second night, we decided to go for a walk. We were kids and enjoyed fantasy movies and games and had a bit of role-playing fun. One of us, though, was too scared to go out in the dark, so on our walk we decided to play a prank on him. We started screaming and running back to the camp, scattered, saying, "He got Henry!" It worked, and we caused our friend Zeb to try and climb an electric fence to escape. I, Henry, came back dirty and bloody, and we hid in the farmhouse until Tim ruined the prank by claiming he heard the brothers skinned people, which caused us to burst out laughing. The next afternoon, we hiked up the nearest hill, called Sims Gap Hill. It was a popular walk for Tim and I when we were kids. The fastest way to get to the hill was by taking the dirt road called the Stock Route, which ran parallel to the main tar road, which led to the town. The two roads are connected by another sawmill road, which was at the base of the hill. Anyway, we walked down the Stock Route, and I pointed out the Hillbilly Brothers property as we went past it. All you can see from the road are piles of rusted old cars. We reached Sawmill Road and walked across the paddock to the hill and had an enjoyable time. We started climbing down the hill as it got late, but underestimated the time it took to walk across the paddock to the road. By the time we reached the road, it was night, and of course, it happened to be pitch black. As we started walking down Sawmill Road to the Stock Route, a pair of massive bright headlights turned into the road from behind us. Naturally, we got off the road, which meant disappearing into the thick patch of trees between the road and the brothers' property. As the lights caught up to us, the vehicle started slowing. Until then, we had thought it was a farmer's ute. But now, we realized it was a very old, very loud tractor. Not wanting to be questioned by any meddling adult, I encouraged the guys to hide. The tractor slowed right down and flashed a spotlight into the trees, and then sped away. The guys asked me who it was, and I said I didn't know. We continued walking slowly until we saw the tractor turn down the Stock Route and then into the brothers' property. Now I was unnerved. The tractor came roaring down the fence line, and I yelled at the guys to run. We ran until we came to a small, well-hidden ditch, which we jumped in and lay very still. The tractor stopped right on us and shined the spotlight over the trees. It didn't illuminate the ditch. Luckily, the driver stopped the tractor and got off, walking over to the fence. I peered up and saw the silhouette of a dirty, disheveled man with messy hair standing at the fence line, looking around. In his hands was a rifle. In a nasally Aussie hillbilly voice, he yelled out, "Where are you, cunts?" We didn't dare move. I started thinking what we'd have to do if he climbed the fence, and started coming our way, but he eventually turned around and got back on his tractor. It started with a groan, and it rumbled down the other way. I got my friends up, and we sprinted towards the Stock Route. ducking under branches and jumping over fallen trees. We hadn't quite reached it when the headlights were behind us again, roaring up Sawmill Road. We made it to the road and panicked. It was still 2 or 3 miles back to the camp, and we wouldn't be able to outrun the tractor. On the other side of the stock route was a state forest with tens of miles of twisting dirt roads, and motorbike trails and goat tracks. Despite how dark it was, and the strong possibility of getting lost, we dove in there. We hid as he went past us again, finding a forest road which led back to the general direction of the town. We followed it for a while, wondering if he had given up, and if it was safe to go back to the stock route. Then he was in front of us, blinding headlights roaring down the forest road. We jumped back in the trees and decided to run. We ran straight past him. Behind us, he turned back on the stock route and chased us again. He circled us 4 times, with us hiding, then running, hiding, then running. When we had gone far enough that we thought we were close enough to the camp, we ran through the woods and jumped back on the stock route to be met by headlights. Tim's mother had come looking for us after finding our camp empty. She had finally found us, and we were still a mile or so from the camp. We quickly piled in and she drove us back. We told her what happened, but she and my parents just said they're weird people and to stay away from them in future.